Tarzan is a fantasy action-adventure and the retelling of the classic Edgar Rice-Burroughs story that was written over 100 years ago. Directed by Harry Potter regular David Yates, the film stars Alexander Skarsgard in the titular role, along with Margot Robbie, Samuel L. Jackson and Christoph Waltz. Now, going into this film, I wasn't really excited. I am a fan of the character of Tarzan and of the story, but I'm not a massive fan. Like, I've seen a lot of the other Tarzan films, so there's been like so many. It feels like there's been like hundreds of Tarzan films. I don't know how many there's been, but when I heard there was going to be a new Tarzan film, I was like, what, another Tarzan film? Really? But I wasn't totally against it, because like I said, I'm a fan of the character and of the story, so I thought, you know, why not? And when I heard that it was David Yates who was going to be directing it, who did, you know, the last 4 Harry Potters, as well as the upcoming Fantastic Beasts, and then it was going to star Alexander Skarsgard as Tarzan and have Margot Robbie as Jane, I was like, that sounds pretty good. I'm actually looking forward to this now. And the trailers had me quite excited as well. I really like the look of the trailers. So I thought, you know what, why not? I'm going to give this a go. It looks like it could be pretty good fun. And overall, it was alright. It wasn't anything great. I think it could have been a lot better than it was, but I thought it was good enough. You know, it wasn't great, but it was fine. I did like the film. There were a lot of positives that I did have with the film. One of the biggest positives I can give this film is that it was a fresh and different take and a new spin on the classic Tarzan mythology. It was a new and original story as opposed to just a retread of the familiar origin story that we've seen like so many times before already, because pretty much every other Tarzan film is just the same origin story, and we've seen that so many times now. We all know the origin of Tarzan in the jungle as a baby, and he's raised by the apes, Lord of the Apes in the jungle. But what I really liked about this film was that it was a different take on the character and the story, that they set it after he'd returned back to London and become more civilised, and it was set 10 years after he'd returned from the jungle, and now he's going back to the jungle and re-becoming Tarzan. And yeah, so I like the fact that they tried to do something different. You know, it was kind of like Hook in that way, in that it was like Peter Pan, like years later, after he wasn't really Peter Pan anymore, he had to go back to Neverland and re-become Peter Pan again. It was that kind of thing. I mean, it wasn't that much like Hook, you know, it was a very different film to say Hook, but in this same kind of thing, in that it was set years after Tarzan had left the jungle, and now he's going back to the jungle and he's re-becoming Tarzan again. I like the fact that they put a different spin on it, and it wasn't just the same familiar origin story. I mean, we did see glimpses of his origin in flashbacks, but I like the fact that it was a different story, that it wasn't just the same origin story we've seen so many times before. It was a different take on the character that we hadn't seen already. Also, I like the fact that it was a darker and more serious and dramatic Tarzan film. Some people might be disappointed that it wasn't a really fun, exciting, over-the-top, adventurous movie, and I kind of wanted a bit more of that, but at the same time I like the fact that they tried to do something different and made it more serious and made it more dramatic, and it was darker more so than any other Tarzan film that had come before, because really it was less of this big, exuberant, over-the-top adventure movie and more of a kind of grounded, real-world film that felt almost like an historical drama that just happened to feature Tarzan, revolve around Tarzan. And I think that was both a good and a bad thing. I'll talk about negatives a little bit later, but in terms of positives, I thought it was a good thing in that it was something different. You know, it felt very different from any other Tarzan film. It didn't feel like, oh, this is something we've already seen before. It's another Tarzan film, the same thing we've already seen a million times before. It wasn't. They tried to do something different. It was a very different kind of Tarzan film. Like I said, it was more serious. It was dark. It was more dramatic. And that way, I kind of liked it. It didn't always work. I think it could have been more fun and adventurous and exciting, but I like the fact that it was dark and it was more dramatic, and they tried to do something different with the Tarzan story. Also, Alexander Skarsgard made for a great Tarzan, not just in terms of looking the part, in terms of his height and build. You know, he's this really big, hulking, kind of muscular guy. There was many a shot in the film where you just see him and he's just like this huge, hulking, you know, man. You're like, wow, that guy is Tarzan. I really like the casting of Alexander Skarsgard in Tarzan, and just seeing him in this film, there's no doubt. You're like, yeah, that guy is Tarzan. He just really looks the part. But also in terms of his performance, you know, it was a much more kind of nuanced and understated Tarzan than we've ever seen before, because usually it kind of goes a little bit over the top. But in this film, they kind of held back and they kind of made it seem a little bit more real, they kind of grounded it a bit more in reality in a sense, and you could buy into it because of Alexander Skarsgard's performance. It felt very convincing and believable. This man who has this very kind of deep and profound love and connection with nature and wildlife, and he played the gentle giant aspect of the character really well. I think he did a really good job in the role, despite having not that much to work with. He didn't really get a whole lot to do, but in terms of what he had to work with there, I think he did the best job he possibly could have done. Also, Margot Robbie made for a great Jane. She too looked the part, and she and Skarsgård made a good match and made for a great pairing as the two leads as well. Samuel L. Jackson also was another highlight. He had a much bigger role than expected, and he was really fun to watch whenever he was on the screen. He was by far the most entertaining character in this film, and he provided a much needed comic relief and levity to the film as well, which it desperately needed. Also, I think David Yates did a good job with the direction of this film. I liked the whole look of the film. It was kind of appealing to watch from a visual perspective, and you could tell it was being filmed by someone who knew what they were doing. Finally, I also liked the action sequences in the film. Although they were few and far between, the action sequences we did get, I liked, especially the ones in which Tarzan kind of re-embraced who he is, and the scenes in which he was kind of interacting with the animals and swinging on vines were entertaining to watch. We didn't get a whole lot of action, but the action scenes that we did get, I liked. They're going on to negatives now, and I do have a fair amount of negatives in this film. Unfortunately, a lot of the positives I have are also kind of negatives as well. There's a lot of things that I kind of both liked and disliked at the same time. Like, there was some elements in this film that there was things that I liked about them and then things that I disliked about them. For example, the story. Although I did like that they tried to do something different with the story, I don't think it was as interesting, as engaging as it should have been. I liked the flashback scenes that showed us glimpses into Tarzan's backstory, but as far as the main story was concerned, I don't think it was anywhere nearly as compelling or as engaging as I think it needed to be. Also, although I like Margot Robbie in the role of Jane, she wasn't given nearly enough to do, and they made an effort at the beginning to make her more than just a damsel in distress, but as the film went on, she had become just more and more of a damsel in distress. There were scenes in which she would hold her own and fight back in retaliation, but at the end of the day, her character kept falling back into the whole damsel in distress stereotype, and although I liked her as a character, she wasn't given nearly enough to do, and really she was just there just to advance the plot by giving Tarzan something to fight for and chase after the whole time. Christoph Waltz's character also wasn't anything special, although he was serviceable and he was perfectly fine in this villainous role. His character was a little kind of bland and generic, and also as far as his motivations and plan was concerned, it was a little kind of stereotypical and uninspired. And although I really liked Samuel L. Jackson in this film, and he did provide the much needed comic relief and he was fun to watch whenever he was on screen, his character did feel a little out of place in this film. Like, there was times when the film was trying to be very kind of serious and dramatic, and then sometimes Samuel L. Jackson's character would butt in and interject right in the middle of a big scene or moment. It would just kind of throw the film off, and just the tone would just seem off, and his character would just seem out of place within the context of the scene. Like, sometimes it just felt like he was in a different film. Like, I liked Samuel L. Jackson in the role, and I think his character was fun and entertaining to watch, and everyone was always kind of laughing and having fun whenever he was on screen, but at the same time, the rest of the film surrounding him was very kind of trying to be very serious and dramatic, and he would often come in and it would just seem out of place. It would seem like he was in a kind of different film sometimes. So even though he was an entertaining character and he was fun to watch, sometimes he would kind of throw the film off a bit, and the tone would seem a little unbalanced in that way. And although I like the action sequences in the film, there were surprisingly very few of them, and although the film was trying to be more of an historical drama version of a Tarzan story, I really do feel like there should have been more action, seeing as though it's been marketed as this big, epic, sprawling action adventure. Like, you've seen the trailers, that's pretty much the action that's in the film. Like, maybe a couple of other action bits that are in the film, but other than that, if you've seen the trailer, you've seen pretty much all the action sequences in the film, really. So, And another big issue I have in regards to this film is the pacing. It took a while to get going, and the whole film, but especially the first half, felt quite slow. And as well as this, there are many instances in the film in which scenes came and went very quickly. Like, there would often be very sudden and erratic time jumps, and we'd suddenly be in the next scene, and you wouldn't even realise that a scene was over, and you'd be in the next scene. And it felt a little jarring in that way, in terms of how it was edited and how it was cut together. Sometimes it felt quite slow, and it was taking a while to get going, and other times seemed to come and go very quickly, and you wouldn't even realise you're in the very next scene. So I think the pacing was a little off, and it was a little kind of all over the place. And because of that, it made it harder to really engage with the film, because sometimes it was moving quite slowly, and other times scenes would come and go quite quickly, and it was just hard to get into it because the rhythm was just a little off. And finally, the CGI wasn't that great either. I mean, it wasn't terrible. I think it was fine. It was good enough. It was passable, but the CGI of the animals and of the gorillas in particular, I don't think was up to scratch. Like I said, it wasn't horrendously bad. It was fine. It was okay. It was passable, but in a world of like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and the Jungle Book, it really stood out as being under par and not really as good enough as it probably should have been. Overall, The Legend of Tarzan may not be one of the best Tarzan films we've ever had, but it did give us a fresh and different take on the character and story we've all come accustomed to over the years. With a serious and dramatic story, well-cast actors in the leads, but bogged down by stereotypical characters, an unbalanced tone and inconsistent pacing throughout, The Legend of Tarzan is a commendably different take on the familiar story, but without the fun and excitement that it desperately needed to thrive. I'm going to give The Legend of Tarzan 3 stars. It wasn't a bad film, but it wasn't that great either. Like, it was okay. I think it was good enough. I think it could have been better, but like I said, it wasn't bad. It was a good film. I think people could enjoy this film and have a good time, but I think it could have been more fun and more exciting and more action-packed and more adventurous. Like I said, that wasn't really what they were going for. They were going for a more serious and darker, more dramatic kind of historical drama, really. But I think a lot of people might go into this film and think, oh, what? It's not really what they're expecting. Like, if people go in expecting a Tarzan origin story, they might be a little thrown off. People go in expecting a really big, fun, action-packed adventure movie, they might think, well, what is this? People might get a little bored. People might not think it's very good. I think it was fine. I think it was good enough, but I'm not sure it was as great as it could have been. Like, I think fans of Tarzan, of the character and the story, probably will like this film and will think it's a really good film, but for everyone else, I don't think it was as good as it needed to be to appeal to a much wider mainstream audience. So there we go, that wraps up my review for The Legend of Tarzan. Well, what did you guys think? Have you seen the film yet? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know down below, I'd love to know. And as always, if you like this video, make sure to click subscribe to see more. But for now, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.